Good morning. From the campus of the United States Sports Academy in Daphne, Alabama. This is Live Sports Talk, and I'm Dr. Arthur Ogden, your host. And every Wednesday morning at 11:30 Central Time, we present the Sports Talk Hangout, discussing the various issues in sport that are of current topic. This morning, we're going to talk about the autonomy of the NCAA's Power 5 conferences. And the panel consists of Dean Steve Butler, who's our Dean of Academic Affairs.
Good morning.
And Dean, forget his name, Tim Foley, third baseman for Kansas State University back in 1727, who was also our Dean of Students Services. We want to thank you all for continuing to send in our suggestions at Sports Talk at USSA.edu. We've been digesting them, and we really appreciate those comments and commentaries. An awful lot's happened since last Friday with the NBA, and we want to salute the commissioner who has taken the bull by the horns and dealt with that terrible, terrible issue of racial bigotry and hatred with the Clippers, and our hearts go out to all the players in the NBA who have band together and stood behind the Clippers. And so the game goes on. But more recently, we've had some reflections, and it's been in the news since we're in football country and everybody is concerned about football, the actions that the NCAA has taken. Now, last Wednesday, we talked about what might happen when the NCAA's board of directors met. The board of directors did meet last Thursday, which is the 24th of April, the day before the players at Northwestern were to vote on their union status. Now, for those of you who don't know, because Northwestern had appealed the decision by the NLRB to grant employee status to their football players, the NLRB has impounded those ballots and is waiting until their decision is reached before they release the results of that vote on unionization. But on the 25th, which was last Friday, the football players at Northwestern did take a vote. So that vote has been cast. It will not be released until the end of the appeal process with the NLRB. In the meantime, last Thursday, the NCAA Board of Directors, which consists of 17 university presidents and is chaired by Nathan Hatch of Wake Forest, met to discuss the issues facing the Division I institutions. Essentially, these are going to affect the Power 5 conferences in Notre Dame, but Notre Dame probably is included in the ACC since they are a partial member with basketball, men's and women's basketball, soccer, lacrosse, and other sports as well. The entire package was passed from this committee onto the General Membership Board of Directors, Division I Board of Directors, for their meeting in August. The time between last Thursday and the time they vote in August is a time for the individual institutions to make comments and to discuss the issues. Among the items that were passed, and we'll talk about them today, our scholarships are to cover the full cost of attendance. And I'm going to let Tim talk about that because his office deals with financial aid. And when the financial aid packages are made, they cover more than just room, books, tuition, and so forth. They also covered more insurance. Now, many schools now offer catastrophic or secondary insurance. Kevin Ware, the ball player from Louisville, who had his leg really, really badly broken, had coverage up to $80,000 by Louisville. Anything over and above that, his parents or his insurance was responsible for it. These new moves will expand that. Better academic and career planning support, which includes student athletes being allowed to have agents. We'll get into that in a little bit more. Student representation on boards and committees will be more prevalent. The cost of family members to attend games, bowl games, Final Fours, etc. will be included. Student athletes being able to transfer, this is an important issue for them. presently, if a student athlete decides to go play for, say, Coach Butler at the University of Alabama, and he decides to take a job elsewhere, well, he can go. There's no penalty. But his athletes have to stay there. If they want to transfer, they can transfer if given permission by the institution, and then they must sit out a year. Sitting out a year will still take place, but they will gain that year of eligibility back. So they don't really lose a year, they just have to sit out a year. Presently, they lose the year and they have to sit out. So here's some questions. And this is kind of a loaded question because we've dealt with it around campus here. Does there seem to be a conflict between the stated missions of the institutions and their athletic programs? I'm going to give that to Dean Butler, our academic dean, first.
I think the big problem is the hypocrisy of the NCAA continuing to stand on this idea of student athletes. I think for the most part they're athlete students when they're on scholarship because of the amount of time they have to put in to do well to earn that scholarship. I think that, having said that, there are schools out there who do a wonderful job of supporting their student athletes and keeping them as student athletes rather than athlete students. And they're the typical ones you hear about all the time. I just saw a thing on ESPN, tribute to Pat Summitt a couple weeks ago, and every person who played basketball for her under scholarship at the University of Tennessee graduated.
Yeah, she's remarkable.
And so there are programs out there, and unfortunately we don't hear when X university has a 98% graduation rate. We only hear when Y university has a 4% graduation rate.
Right.
So, but I think the hypocritical part is the NCAA continuing to insist that they have the student part of the student athlete is important to them. I think it is totally irrelevant to the NCAA how they do in the classroom.
I think, by way of explanation, that term student athlete came about when Walter Byers was the president of the NCAA. And it came about because a student's parents sued the institutions and the NCAA because their son had died. In order to get around that liability, he coined the phrase student athlete. I think that was in 1957, and it has stayed ever since. So the hypocrisy began actually that Dean Butler was talking about actually may very well have begun then, and it is an important point. The other thing is they're all schools now are subject to APR, and that has to do with graduation rates. If they don't have an APR of at least 930 out of 1,000, they're not eligible. And already the University of Idaho has lost its eligibility for any postseason play. I'm going to ask this question to...
Wasn't APR the reason UConn couldn't play in the basketball tournament?
Exactly. APR wasn't.
One thing I'd like to add, we need to focus on the well-being of the student. Everyone wants to say, well, should we pay them or not? Let's focus on the well-being, and that starts with comparing what the Division I athletes, what their schedule is like. Compare that to a regular student who's just taking 12 hours a semester. You're going to see a big difference. And if you are working, you're taking a full load of courses, and you are working at a sport, those 5 days you're working 6 to 9 if you're doing study hall. So we need to take a look at the well-being of these athletes, not just throwing some money.
Yeah, I think that's also part of the package to do something about that. And Dean Foley can speak firsthand to that. He played Kansas State baseball, and baseball, for those of you who don't know it, NCAA baseball, particularly Division I, has a fall schedule and a spring schedule. How many total games did you play in a year? 170?
About that.
Yeah, so they're talking about something else. Anyway, I want to direct this question. Is all of this really market-driven? I mean, it seems to be. And if it is market-driven, Dean Foley, what's going to become of college sports?
Well, I don't know if we've ever had a clear picture of, is football the revenue generator that supports it, which many argue, or does it take away from the revenue? My thinking is that, people say Division I, but Division I means a lot of different things. I mean, you have the, like you said, the power conferences. You have what in basketball they call mid majors, Southern Alabama. You have the FCS schools, and then you have the Division I schools that, like Long Beach State, that don't have a football program.
Right. They call it Division Division One AAA. They might have. I know that my alma mater, when the LaSalle University in Philadelphia, when they dropped football many years ago, they brought it back as a non-scholarship sport. That created a new division, Division One AAA, because they obviously scholarship in basketball. But I think your points are really well made and concerned with the well-being of the athlete. But we go back to this next question, and you hit upon it. What does this do to the NCAA's long-held notions of amateurism? I mean, we hear this all the time. Oh, they'd be amateurs. And I know that the Olympic movement has an entirely different model. Steve?
Well, I was sitting in my season ticket seat at watching the Augusta Green Jackets play baseball, and the second baseman for the Greenville Drive was Russell Wilson.
Yeah.
And he was also the starting quarterback at North Carolina State at the time. The starting right fielder was Kyle Parker, who was the starting quarterback at Clemson at the time. And these guys are making money playing baseball in the summer, and then they go back and they're still eligible to play football as a quote-unquote amateur, as long as they're getting paid for a different sport, which when we look way back, that's what got Jim Thorpe in trouble.
Absolutely.
And so I think the idea of amateurism is kind of misplaced. Michael Phelps technically is an amateur swimmer, but he makes millions and millions of dollars in endorsements.
Certainly.
And you see him on Subway commercials all the time, and he's still. I remember way back when they first came up with professional track and field. A reporter asked Carl Lewis if he was going to become a professional, and he said he couldn't afford it because he was making too much money as an amateur. So, I think the idea of amateurism is antiquated, and we need to either get rid of it or revise it so it makes sense.
Yeah, I think you're quite right, and Tim and I were talking off camera about this. The NCAA is used, or the people who are opposed to this phrase, pay for play. Which I think is a real misnomer. And they always use this notion of amateurism. And the disparity between what coaches, athletic directors, university presidents are making and what these athletes are going through to make sure they have those salaries is where we find the disparity. So it's something we have to take a look at. Tim, do you think that this is going to be affected, impeded, or whatever in any fashion by the fact of Title IX?
I think so. Absolutely. There's still you'll still hear the complaints. Well, what Title IX does is hurt the male athletes, taking away the number of male athletes, so you can add female teams to make sure that there's an equal number of athletes. So I definitely think it will impact it, especially if there's money involved. Again, the majority of female sports, I would say, would be non-revenue generating, if that's a term we can use. So it's always going to be there once you get through how we're going to deal with athletes, but then how are we going to make sure that we're equal with Title IX, 50-50?
The chair of sports management at Drexel University has said, and right now her name escapes me, but she said, it may not be a question so much of Title IX as a question of Title VII, which has to do with taxes, which kicks over another can of worms. In the midst of all this, I pulled out an article just yesterday. NFL executive Troy Vincent wants a developmental league. Now, if a developmental league comes along, and we all realize that the Major League Baseball has its own farm system. Well, the NBA and the NFL use collegiate athletics as their farm system. Well, what happens now if the NFL does declare a developmental league? Will that have an effect on the level of college sports?
I don't think initially it will, but it could long term because there could be student athletes who opt for the developmental league rather than college. I think first everybody will look at it a little skeptically because it won't be established. But you know, down the road, who knows? We do have the developmental league now in basketball,
The NBA,
right. And there's some really good players. I mean, if you look at that developmental league, Steph Curry's younger brother, is it Seth? I think it's Seth Curry.
Right.
He was like the leading 3-point shooter in the NBA's developmental league this year. And that kid that made the winning basket for Oklahoma City, I think it was Friday night or Saturday night, made a winning three-pointer. He was the one of the leading scorers in the developmental league, and played like 17 minutes in the regular season, and then made that key basket.
Right.
So when those kind of success stories on national TV, if it does come about, will be the kind of things that contribute to the development of the developmental league.
Right, and ultimately, it may have a bearing on college sports because some of these players now who are going to college to get that exposure may say, look, I don't need the bookwork, just let me go on and play in this developmental league. We're running short on time, as we always do, and I just want to toss this one out to Tim because he was an NCAA Division I player. Ultimately, what is this going to do to the NCAA, in your considered opinion?
I hope, and I think it will, begin to focus in on the well-being of these athletes, health-wise, academically. I think we have to look at, again, one person commented about, well, why isn't the 20-hour rule enforced? And again, it's not enforced. And if it was enforced, would the sport be quality? I mean, we don't understand what the schedule of these Division I athletes. And if any way we can focus on the well-being, someone threw out there, we'll make online courses mandated for football in the fall. Since their schedule, that was an option. So we got to try to help improve the well-being of these athletes in all facets of life. And I think we're going to see that with some of these things that are going on now.
You know, even if Northwestern isn't successful in becoming a union, I think that in many ways that NLRB ruling drove a lot of these things. That they may not become a union, but they may get most of the things they were asking for without becoming a union.
Right, and all these other lawsuits that are around. I mean, we still think about the pettiness of some of the things that have happened in the past. The NCAA is going to have to revamp all it does with enforcement. They're going to have to do something about that ridiculously huge rules manual. But what was it, Oklahoma or Oklahoma State, 2 players last winter had to pay back $3.53 because they ate too much at an all-you-can-eat banquet or something like that. These go a little bit too far, and I still do not understand why, if I'm given a game jersey to play in the Peach Bowl, that sometime down the line, if somebody wants to give me $150 for it, why I can't do that. But that's a violation. Hey, thank you all for tuning in again for Sports Talk at the United States Sports Academy. We want to say so long. See you next Wednesday morning at 11:30. And for Dean Butler and for Dean Foley, thank you once again. Please keep those suggestions coming at Sports Talk at USSA.edu. Sports Talk at USSA.edu.